Welcome back. We just heard from the community. The group said they think leadership and the culture of a department plays a role in use of force training and outcomes. We brought together police chiefs from around the state for a rare, candid conversation about police training and use of force. St. Paul Police hosted the discussion where we talked about what they're doing in their departments and what they think can help build community trust and deliver better outcomes.
My name is Jeremy Ellison. I'm currently serving as the interim chief of police for the St. Paul Police Department.
My name is Roger Newell, and I'm the chief of police at the Eagan Police Department.
Eric Winter, chief of police for City of Maple Grove.
Scott Borbin with Minnetonka Police.
Dave Bentrud, I'm police chief of the City of Waite Park up by St. Cloud.
Let's start the conversation.
There have been some new mandates that have come down from the post board and from the legislature related to, de-escalation and crisis management and diversity and conflict management. So there are a lot of subjects that we try to train our officers on, more so than when I started my career.
For police departments, we all operate under the same state statute and for the most part have identical use of force policies. You have to also note that there's hiring and making sure you hire the right people. And it really starts with that and making sure that the folks you hire have the ability to problem solve. Problem solving is probably the most important.
Absolutely.
And we train officers to make split-second decisions, but we also need to make sure that they have the ability to slow things down when they can. And then you have the culture of the department, which is a big part of it. Again, we have the same, very similar policies, but what's the culture?
We do quarterly response to resistance and aggression training, which again gets back to that, what's the culture of the organization? And, our goal is not to use force, and we do try to slow things down. And use every tool in the toolbox before we end up putting our hands on somebody, because that's the last thing our cops want to do and the last thing that we as an agency want them to have to do.
Tools in the toolbox. When each of us started our career, those tools look differently. And now more than ever, we have to lean into all things technology and what are the different things that are out there that we're using. Also, one of the things that we're implementing in many departments is drones. It does help us slow down, and it helps us do our job much differently than we did it in the past.
In Maple Grove, we really have 3 pillars.
Chief Warner says it's character, how they interact with people, and initiative.
To take that into the use of force, there are the tactics, there's the technology, there's the equipment, but how does an officer understand the complexity of a use of force decision? And most importantly, assessing an incident before it happens, trying to slow it down.
We do a psychological assessment, and one of the instruments they use is problem solving. And we want to make sure, again, that's one of the areas that I focus most often, is because I want to make sure the officers, as they evaluate a set of circumstances, things start to change rather quickly. And can they maneuver without maybe overreacting and slow down when they can't? If there's a need, in a split second, they try to make the best decision possible for the best outcome. And that's not easy. People are human, and you can't flip switch on and off.
A lot of it has to do with the situation that they're confronted with, and I think communication is one of those things that's key. When we're sitting down interviewing candidates is, do we have people that are good communicators? Because more so now than ever, we need people that are able to communicate to help to escalate situations, but at the same time, be able to turn on the switch too, because some situations can't be resolved by simply talking it through with people. And you do have to use force by simply putting your hands in, taking someone into custody. It's not what we look to do, but that is an inherent part of what we're asked to do as police officers.
How do you define use of force? Because I think so many people have a different definition.
There's a definition, but then there's what the department defines for their accountability systems. So we're guided by state statute on deadly force. We're guided by case law. We're guided by our training, the application of a baton versus a taser versus a firearm versus hands-on. Those are all separate levels of force that we have to train the officers on. I thought the chief brought up a really good point here, is how do we train well, but also how do we document and review so we can learn, and then how do we continue to improve if we need improvement or reward the behavior that we want to get.
It's a spectrum. I mean, officers do hands-on techniques, muscling techniques we call it, all the way up to deadly force. But anywhere you fall on that spectrum, the force has to be reasonable. It has to be necessary.
I know sometimes use of force doesn't look pretty. How can you explain, or how do you explain that to the community? Because the community will sometimes come up and say, okay, I saw this, and I hear another explanation from police. So can you kind of bridge the two to help people understand what happens when force is used?
Well, I think it is ugly. And I think what is important for the officers, and we see it, and we also see it where it doesn't happen, is that you're evaluating it, and as soon as you have control, you need to assess it. And it may be where you need to render aid. You need to be able to identify that need immediately and then start to render aid.
You look at those incidents that they may be lawful but ugly looking. I think that starts with the perception or the knowledge that our communities have on how much force do we really use. Unfortunately, the ones that don't look very well are the ones that get a lot of media attention, and that's where we just have to continue to work with our communities to do that outreach and education.
Chief Warner's point of community outreach and to educate the public is really key, because I think that the public doesn't necessarily fully understand when force is applied, how it's applied, and what leads into an officer making that decision. So, it becomes important for our agencies to make sure that they connect with the community to educate them so they're aware of, what those situations are. That is one of the challenges that we face in law enforcement. Some of the things that, perception or beliefs that people have that officers should be able to do, I can tell you it's unrealistic, some of the things that people, ask police officers to do with resolving situations. And that's the part where, you got to humanize and make people understand these are challenging jobs, and we're asked to go into challenging situations and encounter some dangerous situations. And how do you navigate that? That is, again, the challenge. Each and every day you go and put on the uniform.
Are there situations where that slowing things down doesn't work? Maybe you don't have the chance to de-escalate.
I think Chief of St. Paul's got a traffic stop.
Perfect incident comes to mind where we had an officer a couple years ago that was rear-ended by a person in crisis, most likely. As soon as the car crashed into this officer, he then got out of the car and started attacking the officer with an edged weapon. And the officer was trying to de-escalate by creating distance, giving commands, trying to slow things down.
Get away from me! Drop the knife!
This person was so intent on doing harm to the officer. The officer at one point was on his back and just trying to get away and trying to create distance. And unfortunately, there was nothing more that officer could do, and was forced into a situation where he had to react and use deadly force.
Shots fired! Shots fired!
It's really tricky. I mean, you officers have to make some decisions sometime about when are they going to go put hands on or put somebody under control.
You look at an officer, they don't have superpowers.
Right.
And you look at the nation, and you take Uvalde and the lack of initiative to go in and address that, and you see the outcome. And in the same breath, you want to make sure that they do slow it down, but recognize when they need to resolve the issue in hand. And that's not easy for a person to process.
Are we building in our officers some degree of hesitation? Where are they recognizing the situation for what it is? And so we're talking about de-escalating, we're talking about slowing things down, but I would submit there's a point for the welfare of the person as well as the officer that action needs to be taken sooner rather than later. And that is a difficult needle to thread.
Sometimes it's not clear when you should or shouldn't go. And that becomes the biggest challenge. When's the right time and when's the wrong time? And we can sit and scrutinize those officers in Uvalde, but at the same time, when you listen to what the public's expectation of law enforcement is, which is slowing down, it creates that challenge. Do we or don't we? Now, that said, I will clearly say, the officer should have went in Uvalde, but that provides this context of, really looking at law enforcement right now and hearing what the public is saying, and when we use, the phrase "slow down," in what situation, and I don't know that you could rubber stamp and say every situation requires that.
They say tools, technology, and training is constantly evolving.
So we track every use of force encounter. like St. Paul mentioned, they review it. Our sergeants review the body cam footage. They send it to the next layer. They review and make sure we're in line. And if we have a person who is maybe not aligned with our vision, we need to deal with it. And I think the public should also know that too. We're not here to tell the public this is why we do it. It's also to say we hold our folks accountable, and we should.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of the conversation.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
The chiefs say there is a renewed emphasis on taking care of officers. Some departments make it mandatory to get a checkup from the neck up to see a therapist. They say when the officer's mental health is better, the response is better. We checked with the chiefs we talked with on their use of force numbers and officer conduct payouts. Use of force accounted for less than 1% of total calls over the last 5 years for all departments. Waite Park, Minnetonka, and Maple Grove had no payouts in that time frame. Eagan Police paid $75,000 in 2017. Still ahead, we'll take a look at the state of police training in Minnesota and where it stands today. We sit down with the board who oversees training and standards. Hear where the chair says they need to be more consistent next.